Hi there. This is something I get DM'd about daily, so I thought I'd make a dedicated video. Here's a list of books meant as a general introduction to socialism for those interested. Now, this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list of everything you'll ever need to read ever. It's more of a handful of recommendations that you could knock out in a week or two of reading. All these works can be found for free on the Marxist Internet Archive, so check that out if you didn't already know about it. Otherwise, you can check out LibGen, which has pretty much every scanned work ever. At least I think so. Starting off with the Mario and Luigi of Marxism, Marx and Engels themselves. The first work I'd recommend you start with is The Principles of Communism by Engels. It's set up as a summary more than anything else, with 25 questions and answers provided. It's the most quick and concise explanation of the absolute basics that I like, personally. If it were up to me, this would be the introductory work of Marxism that everybody reads first, instead of the Communist Manifesto. The next work is actually two that should be read together, and that is Wage, Labor and Capital and Value, Price and Profit. Both of these works are precursors of the much larger Capital in 3 volumes, which although is long, isn't as difficult to read as some people make it out to be. These 2 essays, though, present the basics of the Marxist analysis of capitalism, with concise explanations of labor and labor power, the falling rate of profit, surplus value, its extraction, wages, and so much more. Basically, the functions of capitalism. Generally brilliant works, all around. The next work is from Engels, and it is Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. Originally just a separately published section of the larger work Anti-Dühring, this is an excellent overview of the general question, as well as discussion on the Marxian view of dialectics and historical materialism. It shows exactly how scientific socialism differs from the utopian socialisms of the past, and in doing so, also deals with the regurgitated argument we hear almost daily, the one that goes, "Socialism sounds good on paper, but is too utopian to actually be done." Who knew that the people who said such things never actually engaged with the literature? Now, there's much more that somebody can read from Marx and Engels, but for a brief introduction, I think these works are enough. Otherwise, Anti-Dühring, Capital, The German Ideology, The Civil War in France, Critique of the Gotha Program, Marxist Grundrisse, and others are all very important works, but all of those are outside the scope of a basic reading list. Moving into Lenin's works, there are really 2 that are absolutely necessary reading, although if I had my way, I'd make practically everything Lenin wrote necessary reading, because he's just that good. The first is, of course, The State and the Revolution, an absolute banger of a book that goes into the necessity of revolution and its necessary class background, the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat, critiques of anarchism and social democracy, what happens to the state after the revolution, and so much more. One of the most important works in Marxism, and absolutely indispensable. The second work is Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, which equally is a giant of a work that if one doesn't read it, not only could they not hope to understand capitalism in its modern form, but also just how the world generally works. It goes into imperialism as it develops, the role of finance capital, the centralization of capital, concepts of labor aristocracy, and more. It's absolutely brilliant, really. It's also somewhat more academic than the previous work, but it isn't unreadable by any stretch of the imagination. Really, give it a go. As I said for Marx and Engels, Lenin has many other works that are important to read, in particular his continuous dunking on Kautsky, who's seeing somewhat of a revival, if not in thought, then at least in spirit in some sections of the Western left. But adding all those in wouldn't make it a basic reading list now, would it? A minor side point, here's where some people stick in a few of Stalin's works, specifically his Foundations of Leninism and his essay Dialectical and Historical Materialism, among other works. I personally am of the thought that if you've read the previous works mentioned by Marx and Engels and Lenin, you don't really need to touch on Stalin's works in a basic reading list. If you want to, though, I won't stop you. Moving on to Mao, who in my opinion is the single best writer of the popular Marxist canon, with maybe only Fanon being more enjoyable, in my opinion, there are several works to recommend. What's nice about Mao is that a lot of what he wrote was intended for regular soldiers of mostly peasant background to read, and hence he wrote simply, effectively, and concisely. Really just a fantastic time, all around. The first work, which is really 2 works merged into one after the fact, is On Practice and On Contradiction. On Practice is a philosophical exposition on the relation between human knowledge and practice. I've seen some people call it common sense at a point, but honestly, with the mistakes we see repeated over and over again on the left globally, it seems that Mao's common sense really isn't as common as we'd hope. On Contradiction, on the other hand, is a discussion of, well, contradictions. What is a contradiction, their forms, antagonism of contradictions and how they interact, and the relevance of contradictions not only to the material world, but also to the class struggle. Mao builds on this essay with another titled On the Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People, which I also highly recommend you read. Other than that, there are 2 very quick essays to read, which include Oppose Book Worship and Combat Liberalism, both of which are self-explanatory and provide excellent bits of advice for work in political organizations in particular. To reiterate though, this is a very general outline to give you a solid foundation in Marxist theory. There's a lot more, and you can take a look at my book recommendations playlist for that, or simply ask whenever you like through Twitter. My DMs are always open.